In the theme of Father's Day, what's the best reaction you've seen from a dad during and/or after the birth of his child? I was born in the 80s and the ultrasound technology wasn't that great. What my parents didn't know was that instead of one baby there were two. Our hearts were beating at the same time and they could never tell the sex, so they thought it was just one giant baby. So, I come out. Then my mom says, "Doc, I still feel pain," and he looks and says, "I see another head." Apparently my father said, "What the fuck? Whose baby is that?" And then my sister popped out. They were obviously flawed. When I was born, my dad pulled out a Sharpie and drew a star at the bottom of my foot, to make sure they didn't lose me. I was a C-section baby. A couple of years ago, the topic came up with my parents while drinking. I mentioned that it sounds kinda gross. My father looks me right in the eye and say, "Have you ever seen Alien?" It was just like that. When I was born, my father, who is a gynecologist himself, came from watching me do my big entrance, or exit, depending on how you look at it, and said to my mom, "You're not going to believe what you just did." I was over 10 pounds at birth. My dad went to the hospital to visit me and my mum at the time. After hearing a baby scream so loud you could hear it from the elevator, he turns to the nurse with a silly grin on his face and tells her, "Well, this one has quite the vocal cords. I'm feeling sorry for his parents already." She turns to him and tells him, trying not to laugh, "You'll tell me, it's yours." My friend told me his story. He was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, so he was a little purple when he was born. His mom couldn't see what he looked like. His dad told her, "He looks like a California raisin." My dad is a carpenter and was at work when he was told that my mom was in labor with me. His reaction? He went into a shocked stupor and accidentally shot his thumb with a nail gun. And that's the story of why my, then 11-year-old, sister had to fill out my birth certificate. My birth was both a terrifying and wonderful day all at the same time. My mother hemorrhaged pretty badly, so my dad had this turbulent hour in which he was both crying with joy over the birth of his first child, and also with terror at the thought of losing his wife. The doctors wouldn't let him back in the room while they were trying to save my mum's life, so apparently for this hour all he did was pace the hallways outside the room holding me, and refusing to let anyone else near me, as if he was already preparing for it to just be me and him. My dad has never stopped being an utterly devoted, and emotional, father. Edit: sorry, this is a late edit because I was away from the internet until now, but to all those who asked, yes, my mother survived. When I was born after 13 hours of labor, my dad looked at my full head of black hair and blue eyes, looked at my mum and said, "Are you sure she's mine?" My grandfather was the one the nurses let carry me back to my mum post cleanup, and when my mum asked if I was okay he said, "Yeah, I don't think the extra 2 toes will be a big hindrance," which led to my mum frantically tearing the blankets off to check my toes. Basically, the men in my family are dicks. My brother was born about a year after me, and my mother had gone into false labor so many times that she only knew she was really in labor when she couldn't sleep that night. Anyways, later at the hospital, the doctor said that she was gonna be in labor for a lot longer, so he went and ate dinner. She wasn't in labor for much longer. My grandmother delivered the kid and was holding him when a nurse walks by and says, "You can't do that." My grandmother retorts with, "Well, I'm not gonna put it back."
My father, up until I was born, had not even seen a newborn baby. Naturally, he assumed that all babies looked like they do in movies or commercials. As you can imagine, he was quite disappointed when an alien-looking thing is handed to him and introduced to him as his daughter. He handed me back to the doctors and went outside for a smoke to calculate how much all of the plastic surgeries were going to cost.
My own husband during my first C-section. The doc asks if he wants to look over the curtain at the baby being delivered. He looks over. looks back with a look of horror. What's wrong? Your insides are on your outsides. I will never forget the look on his face or the sound of his voice. According to my parents, I was a super fast delivery. Like so fast that the doctors, nurses had stepped out of their room to go attend to someone else, and my mom grabbed my dad and told him to get ready to catch me. My dad didn't even have time to put on gloves and had to catch me, baby gunk and all. Apparently he smiled, passed me to the nurses, who came rushing in, kissed my mom on the lips, then leaned over and vommed everywhere. My son's father is a very well-educated, well-spoken man. He was with me in the hospital room when I gave birth, and the first thing he said after seeing our son for the first time was, "Oh my God. Look at his balls." I was born on Father's Day, haha, funny story. My dad had got tennis rackets and tennis balls as a Father's Day gift, so he was playing with them in the basement, hitting balls against the wall when my mum went into labor. So she yelled at him from the top of the stairs that the baby was coming, and my dad, he says, "Okay, dear, I'll be down here playing tennis." She was livid. My biological father was out drinking while I was born. My mum's best friend and the man I consider my father was there the whole time and used to tell me all the time how I could fit in one of his hands. Each time he told me he looked teary-eyed. I was born in the 80s, and my dad was in the operating room. I have a few older brothers who were all born naturally, but bro number 3 did some damage, so I was born via scheduled C-section, something my parents weren't really used to. My parents didn't know the sex of their new baby, me, ahead of time, so it was going to be a surprise. The surgeon put his hand in my mum's abdomen to reach for me, and yelled to the room, "It's a girl," before getting me out. My dad was so excited he just blurted out, "How can you tell?" And the surgeon looked at him with a sarcastic face and said, "She's wearing earrings." When my dad was born, my grandpa wasn't even there. He was asleep in the lobby of the hospital. The doctor had to go and find him, to tell him he was a father. When he came into the delivery room and the doctor showed him my dad, he only had one thing to say: "I thought they were supposed to be cute." Naturally, like most babies, I was crying after I was born. My dad was yelling at the nurses saying that they were doing something wrong since I wouldn't stop crying. They kicked him out of the room. My mom loves to tell the story about my older brother, parents' first kid, being born. They got to the hospital around 2 a.m., and after the initial examination the doctor said it was going to be a while still and disappeared. An hour or so later the nurse says it's getting to be time, so she goes to find the doctor and can't. He's not answering pages, anything. There was a trash can at the foot of the bed, and my dad started freaking out, yelling about his first kid is going to born straight into a trash can, and what a horrible start to life that is. Another nurse calmed him down just in time for the doctor to show up yawning. He'd fallen asleep somewhere and nothing was waking him up. My daughter was born on New Year's Day, 6 weeks ahead of schedule. They had a whole set of people from the NICU there as she was being born. The time comes, she is forced out, and a very strange color. No crying as expected either. The doc shows me her quickly, asks if I want to cut the cord, to which I say you do it so the other folks can do their job. We didn't know the sex beforehand, so my wife looks at me and asks what did we have? I realize I didn't look closely, and the doc didn't announce it, so I said, I think it was a girl. Over my shoulder from the corner of the room, as they are cleaning her up, getting her to breath, I finally hear a wail and the doc laughingly confirming the sex. Best 2 things I have ever heard in my life. My daughter was fine, just a rough few first minutes in the world. I was born in '75 during the strikes, so it turns out my parents didn't know they were having twins. My dad was outside the room, and wasn't told about me until a few minutes after they announced my brother. I was preemie and not so good, and didn't have a name. They had chosen one boy's name and one girl's name, and my brother got the boy's name. My parents were worried I'd die without name, so my mum frantically skimmed a book of names and found Craig, coming from a craggy cliff. My dad's called Cliff. Meanwhile, their best friend and neighbor was a cop, so he drove down our street and announced the news on his loudspeaker. He then broke into the house and found all the baby stuff, the cot and clothes. The whole street got together and bought a second one of everything, different colors where possible, and put it all back. When they got home with my brother, I was in ICU a couple of weeks. He thought they had been broken into. Already panicked about how they were going to pay for 2 babies, Dad had recently lost his job and Mum was still a trainee nurse. They were stunned to find the second set of baby clothes. It's such a different world now that I can't imagine that happening again. My dad told me today is that all he can really remember were my eyes. He says I opened them, looked right at him, and he knew at that moment what true love was. I'm tearing up. Let's talk about dinosaurs or something.